My name is Chris, and before I even start, I want to make one thing clear. This is not a story I like telling. In fact, I had forgotten about it for decades until something brought it back. I was 17 that summer, 17, broke, and stuck working nights at this pizza place on the outskirts of my hometown. Now, when I say pizza place, don't imagine anything glamorous. This wasn't some cozy mom and pop shop, or even a decent chain. It was a grease-stained little box of a restaurant that smelled like burnt cheese and industrial cleaner. The pizza was awful, and I mean awful. Soggy crust, sour sauce, cheese that tasted like rubber. Nobody went there because of the food. People went there because, well, it was there. And for me, it was either sling bad pizza or deal with my parents asking why I wasn't working. Most nights, it was dead quiet. Hours of folding cardboard boxes, refilling the soda fridge, listening to the buzz of a fly stuck in the neon light. The kind of silence that makes you feel like you're in a holding cell instead of a restaurant. That night, it was just like every other, dead quiet, until the tablet buzzed. The order came in around 10:30. A large sausage and olive pizza, and that caught me. Because we never got olive orders. Hell, I wasn't even sure we had olives in stock, but we did. I looked at the address, way out past the delivery zone, farther into the woods than I'd ever gone before. My instinct was to reject it, but before I could, my manager, Russell, waved his hand and told me to take it. Russell was the kind of guy who thought managing meant sitting in the back office scrolling, read it until his eyes bled. He didn't care if it was sketchy. He cared that I hadn't left the shop all night. So I made the pizza, boxed it up, entered the address into my phone. I remember it clearly. Before I stepped out the door, I glanced at the delivery instructions stapled to the box, and I swear to you, this detail has been burned into my memory ever since. It said, park on the street behind the house, walk through the backyard, knock on the back door only. Back door only. Now, at 17, you don't question things the way you should. My brain made excuses. Maybe they had a sleeping baby in the front room. Maybe the front door was broken. Maybe they didn't want their parents knowing they'd ordered pizza. 17-year-old me didn't think. This is how horror movies start. The drive was long, longer than I expected. The town fell away, one streetlight at a time, until it was just me and the dark stretch of road. Humid air pressing against the windshield, the smell of sun-baked dirt and old plastic lingering in the breeze. When I cracked the window, by the time GPS said I'd arrived, the neighborhood wasn't a neighborhood at all. Just a thin, cracked road winding behind houses that looked abandoned. I found the number, pulled over onto gravel, killed the headlights. The house was wrong. Sagging porch, overgrown yard, no cars in the driveway, no lights, no sound, nothing. Just that rickety wooden fence leading up toward the back door. And I was supposed to walk through it. I don't know if you've ever been in a moment where your gut screams at you to turn around, but you ignore it anyway. That's what this was. Pizza in one hand, flashlight in the other. I walked up the incline. The back door was one of those old white ones with a little square of glass at the top. The kind you'd see in a trailer, with a cheap curtain pinned over the window. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again. Still nothing. I was raising my hand for the third knock when it happened. The curtain twitched, not pulled aside, not lifted, just a finger brushing against it. Someone was standing right there, inches from me, not opening the door, just watching. My skin crawled, but before I could process it, headlights cut across the yard. 2 cars, no markings, no sirens. Just dark, unmarked sedans pulling up behind mine. For a second I thought, great, I'm trespassing. I'm about to get arrested. But then the door opened and a man stepped out. Not a pizza customer, not a neighbor. He lifted something in his hand, a badge. He walked straight toward me, calm but sharp. He told me, flat, no explanation, to go back to my car and wait. So I did. I sat there, engine off, pizza box cooling on the passenger seat, while more men slipped out of the shadows. 4, 5, maybe more. Flashlights in hand, guns low at their sides. They circled the house without a word. Not like normal cops, not loud, not announcing themselves, just hunting. I watched one of them test the back door handle, saw him shake his head when it wouldn't open, saw another whisper something, then vanish into the dark. I shouldn't have been there. I knew that. And then, just as quietly as he'd appeared, the first officer came back to me. Crouched down by my car window, he looked at the pizza box, sighed. Then he told me, "You shouldn't be here. There's an active investigation on this property. Leave now." That was all he gave me. Nothing else. I asked if he wanted the name, the phone number from the order. He glanced at it, jotted it down, and waved me off like I was an inconvenience. So I left. The ride back felt endless, every mile heavier than the last. And with every mile, the reality hit me harder. If those cops hadn't shown up when they did, if they had been 5 minutes later, what exactly would have happened when that back door finally opened? I'll never know, but I know this. Someone ordered that pizza. Someone typed in those instructions. Someone brushed that curtain when I knocked, and they weren't planning to pay for it. It is Chris again, and what I'm about to tell you happened only a few years ago. I'm older now, married, 2 boys, a career in insurance that pays the bills and not much else. My life is stable, ordinary, but this is the closest I've ever come to losing all of it in a single night. It starts with a house, not the one I grew up in. This was a beach house my father left me when he passed. A modest 2-story, just 1 block from the boardwalk in Delaware. I'd never been inside it when he was alive. He rented it year-round, and I guess I never had a reason to visit. But when he died, it became ours. So my wife and I decided to make it a tradition. Every summer, 1 week with the boys at the beach. Nothing fancy, just sand, bikes, the smell of salt in the air. It felt like a gift, a way to keep my dad alive in some small, quiet way. I never thought it would turn into a nightmare. It was a Wednesday in mid-July. The boys were exhausted after a full day on the sand, and by 9:30 they were out cold. My wife and I stayed up on the back deck, playing cards, sipping wine, listening to the surf carry in through the night air. It should have been perfect. But then our older son, Jordan, came outside. He had this uneasy look in his eyes. He said, "Dad, I keep hearing scratching in my room." I thought it was just the creaks and groans of an old house, maybe a raccoon in the rafters. But I followed him back anyway, wine still warm on my tongue. His room was dark, too dark, the kind of dark that feels thicker than it should be. He pointed to the wall near his bed. "It's coming from there," he whispered. So I stood still, quiet, listening. At first nothing, just silence. And then, Faint, but undeniable. Scratching. Long, dragging scratches, like fingernails tracing across wood. I crouched down, ear to the wall, and that's when I heard it. Not an animal, not a raccoon. Breathing, slow, deep, human. I staggered back, heart racing, and before I could even process what I'd heard, it erupted. A scream, a guttural, furious, inhuman scream that exploded from inside the wall. Jordan jumped. I grabbed him by the arm and yanked him out of the room. His little brother, Scott, was still asleep down the hall. I scooped him up in my arms without waking him and ran for the stairs. But halfway up, another scream shook the walls. Louder, closer, and then movement. I turned and I saw him. A man charging down the hall toward us. Filthy, ragged, eyes wild. He wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't supposed to exist. But there he was, sprinting straight for me and my sons. I nearly tripped, clutching Scott as tight as I could, dragging Jordan up the steps with my free hand. We burst onto the deck, and my wife turned just in time to see me slam the sliding glass door shut. 2 seconds later, he hit it. The glass shook in its frame. He slammed into it over and over, pounding, clawing, smearing filth across the pane. I pressed my shoulder against it, trying to hold it shut, every muscle in my body screaming. He shrieked, words spilling out of his mouth I won't repeat. My wife grabbed the boys, shielding their faces, dialing 911 with shaking hands. I locked eyes with him, inches of glass between us, and for the first time in my life I thought, if this breaks, I'll die. My family will die. I was ready to fight him with everything I had. But before that could happen, flashing lights, sirens, 2 officers burst into the house from the side door. One tackled him from behind. The other wrestled his arms into cuffs. And just like that, it was over. Except it wasn't. The police stayed. They asked questions. We walked the house together, searching for answers. And what they found made my skin crawl. Beneath the back porch was a hidden entrance. A crawl space. A long, narrow cavity, running the length of the house's foundation. At the far end, a loose panel inside Jordan's closet. That's how he'd been there. He wasn't an intruder who broke in that night. He had been living there for weeks, maybe months. The detective told me later. He admitted he had found the crawl space during the off-season, that he had been stealing food from our kitchen and the neighbor's trash, and that he was planning to hurt us. That night, he came out of the walls. We didn't go back that summer. Too raw, too terrifying. I eventually hired a crew to seal the crawl space shut, every panel and gap covered in concrete. We use the house again now. We pretend it's normal. But I can't stand in Jordan's room anymore. Not for long. Because every time I do, I hear it. The scratching, the breathing, the scream. And I wonder how many nights he stood there, inches away, listening to my children sleep. If I could take one moment and press it flat, beneath a thumb, make it small, enough to study, I'd press the moment I opened my eyes in a field and Taylor was gone. That tiny, absurd second, when the world rearranged itself, and I was left holding the wrong version of the night. Still Chris again. I was 16 that summer. The kinds of summers you bottle up and tell yourself are forever. Long days of bike tires on gravel, cheap beer somewhere at the edge of town. The kind of boredom that smells like sun and promises you nothing but freedom. We thought forever belonged to us. Taylor and I had known each other since forever meant middle school. She was loud in a way that convinced you there was nothing to be afraid of. A reckless brightness that made walls feel optional. I was quieter, the kind of kid who kept his mouth shut until the right joke slid into place. We belonged together then, like two odd notes that sounded okay when you heard them at night. That July night, we decided to go out and find a new spot. The old places had their ghosts. The rusted silo, the stretch behind the high school where kids left cigarette burns like signatures. Taylor wanted something clean, something that felt like an edge of the world. She said there was a field past the last light pole where the town stopped caring. No fences, no cows, no bullshit, she said. Just stars. We took our bikes and a blanket and a half bottle of cheap red tucked inside. Taylor's backpack like contraband. It was the kind of wine that tasted like someone had poured sadness into a plastic bottle, and it loosened us enough to talk about things we didn't usually say out loud. Whether we'd leave this small town, whether boys mattered, the stupid little future we could imagine without anything bad happening to it. The ride out felt longer than it should have. It always does when you're young and the dark is new. The road went from asphalt to gravel to nothing but dirt and the smell of crushed grass. At some point, the town lights thinned and the world narrowed to the cone of our bike lamps, and the sky spread so wide it hurt to look at. When we stopped, there was nothing but the ocean of black grass and a sky pinned with a thermoplastic of stars. We spread the blanket, uncapped the bottle, and lay back like gods with no followers. At first, we traded names for constellations, half-remembered stories about Orion and asterisms we'd learned in school, and then promptly forgot. It was ordinary in the way ordinary is dangerous. The kind of perfect night that pretends the rest of your life is never coming. Taylor nudged the bottle toward me. "Want to see if we get lucky?" she said, and she meant that in two ways at once. We were both half hoping and half expecting to see a meteor streak across the black. Not a big dramatic one, just something to mark the night. We watched for a while. The air was warm but not oppressive. A breeze occasionally lifting the blanket at the edges like someone flipping a page. I remember thinking how the stars looked cleaner out there. No fog of town light to blur them into a smear. We'd been talking about nothing important when she pointed up and laughed. There was a streak, bright, quick, a cutting line across the bowl of the sky. We both shouted at the same time, that stupid childish whoop that comes from being amazed. Then Taylor laughed and closed her eyes like you do when you make a wish. I can still see the way her face softened. For a stupid, beautiful second, I thought maybe the thing I wanted would be something small and fixable. Maybe I'd ask for a decent job, or that she'd finally kiss me and not look away. I do not remember what she wished for. She asked me to make a wish too, but I remember choosing to just feel it. The heat of her shoulder, the tilt of the earth, the falling star smearing white, then gone. Then, I am not making this up, I closed my eyes, only for a second, only for 5 seconds at most. That's the part that has been measured 100 ways in my head since. Not a nap, not a sleep, not anything useful. I was savoring the sky and the stupid summer high. And then I opened them. She was gone. Gone. Not off to pee, not walking to the car. No bike. No backpack. No outline in the grass. The blanket lay folded where we had left it. My bike sat on its side. Tires still spinning slowly like it was confused. The sky went on, indifferent as ever. I sat bolt upright, teeth chattering for reasons that had nothing to do with cold. I called her name into the dark. Taylor, and my voice looked small in the open air. The sound of it came back to me like an echo that belonged to someone else. At first, I thought I'd do the rational things. I checked the blanket, pockets, looked under the nearest clump of grass. Around the ditch line, my heart turned into a fist in my chest and refused to be anything else. I called her phone until the battery screamed and died. No answer, no missed calls, no last-second texts. The time on my phone read 3:30 a.m. That number cuts me clean. People say 3 in the morning, like a casual shorthand. But there is a shape to 3:06 a.m. A small, exact point where whatever day you had is suddenly lost. For me, it became a marker, a bruise. It's the moment something wrong decided to be wrong and left me with the smell of wet grass and the taste of metal on my tongue. I did the only thing that escaped me. I got on my bike and pedaled. I pedaled like someone chasing a train and missing it by inches. Hard and furious, legs burning, air hitting my face like punishment. The ride home was everything of adolescence. Reckless, stupid, fueled by the boldness of someone who believes consequences happen to other people. When I woke up the next morning, Taylor had been home for hours. She had left me a furious text. "Where the hell did you go last night?" She wrote that she'd been alone until 3 in the morning and waited there for me. Then biked home pissed as hell, convinced I ditched her. I stared at my phone with the same hollow. Then I called her. The first words out of her mouth were an accusation, and the second were confusion. She said she had been the one who woke up alone at 3 a.m. I told her the exact same thing. We stared at each other through a wall of incredulity. She insisted she had waited and that I simply vanished. I insisted the reverse. Neither of our phones recorded a single outgoing call in that hour. No missed connections. No camera capture. Nothing. The only thing the night left behind was a timestamp 3 a.m. punctured into our memories like a label. For a long time, we tried to treat it like a prank, like someone had slipped into the field and hidden until morning to freak us out. We accused each other of practical jokes and half laughed, like we believed the joke ourselves. But neither of us had any reason to play a game. We were just kids with too much time and not enough gravity. The thing about a missing hour is not just that it's missing. It's that your mind does what it always does with the unknown. It fills the space with possibility, and most of those possibilities are worse than reality. We ran through every scenario until our brains were raw. Someone drugged us. We blacked out. An animal had dragged her away. She had wandered and gotten lost. None fit cleanly. No one had any scratches on their arms. No bike tracks pointed away from the blanket except my own, which showed frantic, clumsy pedaling. Taylor's bike was exactly where she had left it, locked to a post, but she swore she had never unlocked it the whole night. We tried to reconstruct the night down to cigarette butts and constellations. We retraced our route. We asked neighbors if they'd seen anything. One old man said he heard 2 kids laughing far out in the fields around midnight, but nothing at 3. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. That was it. The town shrugged and carried on. There's a particular kind of small-town silence that takes the form of a patient animal. People notice, but they don't always say. The sheriff checked the field and made a report, more to make paper move than to make things happen. He was polite, and his words had the texture of someone trained to be unhelpful in a comforting way. "We'll keep an eye out," he said. The phrase felt like a bandage someone stuck on a broken bone and called it care. Time did what time does. It coated the edges with dust. We continued to see each other at school. We said stupid things in class to try and shove the memory under jockstraps and algebra, except the memory doesn't stay under anything. It stretches and grows. It comes back with a smell or a weather pattern and insists you look at it again. Taylor and I both stopped going to the field. We stopped stargazing because the sky that night stopped being an ally and became a blank interrogator. Once, months later, I walked by the edge of town and the old road smelled like cut grass. I felt my chest tighten like someone had grabbed it, and I had to sit down on a curb and breathe until the world made a reasonable rhythm again. We drifted, not because we wanted to, but because terror leans and age does not always support the weight of shared secrets. I moved in small increments away. A date in another town, different friends, the inertia of ordinary things. Taylor moved away a few years later. We promised to keep in touch and invented reasons not to. Years have their own permissions. When people die, when jobs change, when bank accounts become adult-sized, the small things you once thought were the world become trivia. That is how forgetting works. You trade fear for complexity. But certain things do not forget you. Every so often I find myself looking at the sky and timing it. I'll check the clock. I'll note the angle of the clouds. If I'm honest, sometimes I waste time counting stars into numbers like a man trying to measure a river with his hands. 3 a.m. refuses to be practical. It sits in my life like a loose tooth, and no amount of chewing makes it settle. There was one night, 10 years later, when I heard about a kid who'd wandered onto that same field and come back with a story so scrambled it made me ache. He spoke of a white light that smelled like ozone, of a pressure in his ears, and waking up 2 towns over with no memory of the ride. The rumor flared and died like half a cigarette. I thought of Taylor and of the way she closed her eyes that night, like you do when you trust the darkness with your wish. I wanted to call her, to ask if she'd ever seen a light in the sky, but the adults we became have fewer brave muscles than teenagers do. I sat in my car and watched the high beams of strangers pour across the highway like bad stitches. Sometimes, when Jordan, my son now, stays up late and asks me to look for satellites, I take him out to the backyard. We lie on a blanket and point at the sky. I tell him small lies, that the stars are fixed, that meteors are pretty, that if you wish hard enough, the wish gets filed in a drawer for someday. He believes it, which is the only kindness I allow myself. But at night, when his breathing slows and the house grows small, I stand at the window and look toward that old road. I think about how close the world can be to you without you ever knowing, about the way a single second can contain a gulf. I think about Taylor, what wish she made, if any, and whether part of me is sitting in that field, waiting for the rest of my life to come back. If you ask me what happened that night, I'll tell you the things I know for sure. We were stargazing. We saw a shooting star. I closed my eyes, and then 3 o'clock on the clock belonged to someone else. Taylor and I both woke up with the wrong timeline. Nothing in the mundane world explained it. And then I'll tell you what I don't know, which is the real meat of the thing. I don't know how the world can let you hold one version of a night in your chest while handing someone else the other. I don't know if someone took her, or if the world simply decided to notch itself differently for 2 kids on a blanket. I don't know if the field is a seam where 2 realities stitch together and sometimes get sloppy. Here's the last thing. The next time you lie out under the stars and you make a wish on a streak of light that crosses the sky, Remember that wishes are small transactions with a universe that has poor bookkeeping. Keep your eyes opened for longer than you mean to. Count the time. Notice when the air changes. And if your phone clocks 3 a.m. wrong, if the night feels like a different animal, get on your bike and don't stop until you can't remember why you were running. Because I learned something that night that keeps my shoulders tight even now. The world is not as seamless as it pretends to be. There are edges. Sometimes those edges are a field, and sometimes they are a curtain twitching at a back door. Sometimes they are the space between one breath and the next. If I could give one piece of advice to the version of me that closed his eyes for 5 seconds, I would tell him this: don't close them. Not then, not ever. Keep looking, keep counting, keep a light on.